Civil rights movement is a subject of much discussion every year during Black History Month. However, one element of this history that tends to receive very little attention was the interplay in the movement between nonviolent tactics and self-defense. While some civil rights leaders such as Dr. King and James Lawson embraced and preached nonviolence from a moral and philosophical perspective, this was not true for many activists who accepted it instead as a tactic. This was recognizing this. Even Dr. King often stressed the strategic and practical reasons for using nonviolence rather than its philosophical merits. Since the turn of the century, black activists like Ida B. Wells, Henry McNeil Turner, and others have advocated for armed responses to Jim Crow terrorism. In fact, in the long history of the black freedom struggle in all its phases, the concept of self-defense on an individual and community level had been understood as a basic right. This didn't disappear during the era of the civil rights movement. In fact, on many occasions, black Southerners continued to exercise self-defense to protect their struggle in the face of white power terrorists. This happened not in opposition to, but in conjunction with, nonviolent protest. It was often armed defense, or at least the threat of force, that saved civil rights workers from attacks from white supremacists. This was especially true for Robert F. Williams and the Monroe County NAACP membership. Robert F. Williams had a rebellious attitude toward white supremacy his entire adult life. In the 1940s, Williams moved to Detroit from North Carolina to work in the war industries. While in Detroit, he became part of the movements for racial and economic equality led by communists and other radicals. After serving in the Korean War, Williams returned to Monroe County, North Carolina, later becoming the head of the local NAACP. He built a chapter composed primarily of black workers, including many veterans who were exceptionally militant in their temperament and fed up with racism. The Monroe NAACP chapter engaged in a variety of struggles seeking desegregation in the later part of the 1950s. Unlike other trends in the movement, Williams' group often openly armed itself to ward off trouble. Monroe County faced a truly vicious Ku Klux Klan organization led by Catfish Cole. When the NAACP sought to desegregate a swimming pool, Cole stated that any African American going to a white swimming pool is not looking for a bath, he's looking for a funeral. Amidst an escalation of Klan violence throughout the state, Williams and his counterparts began to arm themselves more systematically, developing military-like organization, digging trenches and other strong points in their community, and setting up a rifle range. In October 1957, after a very large rally, the Klan decided to threaten Monroe's black community by assembling a large armed motorcade. To their surprise, the well-organized forces of Monroe's NAACP let loose a hail of gunfire, causing Klan members to flee at high speed in what quickly became a rout. Clearly terrified of the implications of armed blacks ready to fight terrorism, the next day, white city leaders banned KKK motorcades. The Klansmen, true cowards, never again returned for night rides in Monroe County's black community. Williams later gained national attention for defending a group of Monroe youths who were accusing of molesting a young white girl and faced a local lynch mob. Such bold stances drew criticism from more moderate civil rights forces, including the NAACP national leadership, who did not want to take on controversial cases and board Williams' ready acceptance of assistance from communists and black nationalists. In the 1960s, Williams quickly became a magnet for those around the country who supported the right of black people to arm themselves in the face of terror. His book, Negroes with Guns, became something of a manifesto to young militants convinced of the principle of self-defense. At the same time, Williams did not eschew nonviolent tactics, engaging in sit-ins in Monroe, for example. Williams was later forced into exile, going to Cuba and then China, after playing a key role in organizing for protection for nonviolent demonstrations in Monroe. At his 1996 funeral, Rosa Parks, who is now heralded as an icon of nonviolence, told the audience that she had long admired Williams' courage and commitment. Another awesome example of armed self-defense within the movement can be taken from the heroic Deacons for Defense and Justice. Civil rights demonstrations in Bogalusa, Louisiana, had found relatively little success in the early 1960s. By 1965, the seeming intractability of Jim Crow brought activists from the Congress for racial equality to town. A victory in Bogalusa would have been significant for the national movement, since the local Ku Klux Klan was notorious for its bold acts of terrorism and, as it was across the South, was fully integrated into the local power structure. A victory in Bogalusa would be a sign that the movement could win anywhere. Demonstrations in the city's downtown were first broken up by mobs, and in June, white supremacists shot the first black sheriff's deputy while he was on patrol. Behind the scenes, a group of black men calling themselves the Deacons for Defense and Justice started meeting, discussing tactics, and slowly building an arsenal. The Deacons were essentially an underground organization, with only a few leaders publicly proclaiming their membership. Nonetheless, they expanded quickly throughout the South, and even had a chapter in Illinois. In particular, the Deacons sought to organize in areas where the Klan was strongest. In cities like Bogalusa, they semi-secretly guarded the offices and persons of civil rights activists. In 1966, the Deacons drew national attention over their participation in the multi-day March Against Fear through Mississippi, during which the slogan "Black Power" made its first appearance by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee organizer Stokely Carmichael. The Deacons' participation was controversial because it did not fully conform to the image of nonviolence, but they were ultimately allowed to remain. They hung off to the side of the main march, securing the route against snipers and ambushes. The Deacons also provided armed escorts to those traveling to local airports at night. While the full truth may never be known, government authorities, and most likely the Klan, feared that the Deacons may have been armed with grenades and automatic weapons, which served as powerful deterrents to white supremacists considering offensive action. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had pioneered the sit-in movement that desegregated lunch counters all over the country. Just a few years earlier, it was considered a cornerstone of the mainstream civil rights movement. The SNCC led the student section of the civil rights struggle, helping to register African Americans in the most racist and dangerous areas of the South, including the Mississippi Delta and Lowndes County, Alabama. SNCC was influential in creating the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, perhaps the most famous working class organizing effort to have ever taken place in the South. Mirrored in other places throughout the South, the MFDP was a statewide political party that challenged Dixiecrat control of the Democratic Party and the white supremacy embedded in the electoral system as a whole. Concerned about preserving the solid South, liberals in the Democratic Party permitted an all-white slate from Mississippi and denied the MFDP its place at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. The white power structure's rejection of the MFDP led to a radicalization of many within the civil rights movement. Activists in an SNCC and elsewhere began to see the problems of African Americans in the United States as greater than just the denial of democratic rights. They developed an analysis heavily influenced by the African liberation movement and sent delegations to meet with revolutionary leaders all around the world. SNCC turned dramatically away from the pacifist mainstream civil rights movement, cutting ties with many liberal organizations. Influenced by Malcolm X and the Watts Rebellion of 1965, SNCC leaders like Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, Jim Foreman, and others began to articulate views based on Marxism and revolutionary black nationalism. SNCC became a breeding ground for the young revolutionaries. One of the first civil rights and student organizations to denounce the Vietnam War, SNCC elaborated an anti-imperialist analysis that distinguished itself from the issue-oriented and often nearsighted outlook of other organizations of that era. Despite the problems of sexism that plagued all movements of the period, black and white, some of the most dynamic women of color leaders, including Kathleen Cleaver of the Black Panthers, came to prominence as SNCC leaders. SNCC's Black Women's Caucus produced a number of leading feminists, many of whom went on to form the Third World Women's Alliance in the 1970s. In 1966, SNCC activist Willie Ricks proclaimed the slogan of black liberation movements to come. Black Power, what it says. SNCC leaders like Stokely Carmichael and H.R. Rap Brown became widely known premier revolutionary leaders, with Carmichael's book, Black Power, emerging as one of the first manifestos of the revolutionary movement. Always vocal of the nonviolent principles of mainstream civil rights groups, Malcolm X organized the Secular Organization of Afro-American Unity in 1964 to take the political demands of the growing Black Power movement into an international arena. For those forces increasingly frustrated with the mainstream civil rights leadership and the overall project of integration into a white-dominated society, Malcolm offered an uncompromising internationalist vision and a no-nonsense rhetoric that linked the struggle of black people with anti-colonial struggles abroad. As such, Malcolm, along with militant leaders like Robert F. Williams, served as a bridge to a new stage in the civil rights movement, in which the demands for equal democratic rights expanded into a struggle for national liberation. As the civil rights struggle widened into a national liberation struggle, many activists began looking for political strategies that went beyond the integrationism of mainstream civil rights groups. Influenced by the national liberation struggle sweeping the oppressed countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, more and more black militants began to study socialist ideas. The two tendencies of the civil rights movement, therefore, cannot be fully understood in the tactical framework of violence versus nonviolence, what is often referred to as the Malcolm versus Martin debate. The more radical wing of the black liberation movement set its sights beyond the democratic goals of freedom and equality that the mainstream civil rights groups aimed for. It aimed for social equality based first on and foremost on the black community's control of its own organizations and institutions. Dozens of national groups and hundreds of local organizations took part in what became a full-scale national liberation movement within the United States. Perhaps the best-known black liberation group in the United States is the Black Panther Party for self-defense, organized in 1966 by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. The Black Panthers began as an organization dedicated to the protection of Oakland's black community from racist police violence. In 1967, however, when Black Panther Party members staged a dramatic demonstration by walking into the California State House with shotguns, It was it was legal in California to carry such weapons, by the way, to bring to their to bring attention to their 10-point program. Um, they were thrust into the national spotlight. In the next 2 years, the Black Panthers developed into a major national organization with thousands of members. By 1970, they had 35 chapters. The Black Panthers were best known for their survival programs, which provided much needed aid to the black community. At its peak, their breakfast program fed 200,000 school children a day. They initiated and operated free clinics, food drives, sickle cell disease awareness programs, and in Oklahoma City, a free ambulance service. The Black Panther Party should not be confused with a service organization, however. They considered the survival programs a step towards self-determination and a way to raise political consciousness of black people. They spoke about the necessity for a socialist revolution inside the United States. The party's political education stressed the principles of Marxism, and the party elaborated anti-imperialist politics, which included cultivating relationships with revolutionaries from Africa to North Korea. Bourgeois historians often try to downplay the role of the state in the destruction of the Panthers and all progressive revolutionary movement. When they do acknowledge state repression, it is to discourage revolutionaries, especially from oppressed nationalities, from taking action. As long as capitalist oppression exists, the rise of revolutionary movements is a historical certainty. Revolutionary ideology and organization embraced by the most oppressed sectors of the working class is what the ruling class fears most. All Williams, the Deacons, and SMCC, the Panthers, and many more have fought for and the sacrifices they made will not be in vain. Join the PSL, smash racism, and fight for socialism. Thank you.